All right, let's take a look at solving quadratics by taking square roots. So I want to start off this quick little intro with this problem I have right here. Just also keep in mind, before we get started, keep in mind that that right there is what we call a square root. That's the square root symbol. Okay, so when I say square root, I mean just that. Okay, so if we look at this problem right here, we have x squared equals 4. We're trying to figure out what can I plug into here so that the number I plug in for x, I square it, and then I get 4. Well, it turns out that I can actually plug in two different values and still get the answer of 4. And that is, if I plug positive 2 in and square it, that will give me 4. And if I plug in negative 2 squared is negative 2 times negative 2, which is also positive 4, because a negative times a negative is a positive. And so one kind of maybe quicker way to do this, instead of kind of just thinking in your head, I mean, you could do mental math too and say, okay, from this point I would have x equals 2, and just to make sure I get both answers, I want to put the negative 2 there also. And so then you would have that as your answer. You're just using mental math. Now, if you got to a situation where you couldn't figure it out using mental math, whether you use mental math or a calculator or whatnot, you just have to make sure you get both answers. There's two answers when you solve a quadratic. Okay? And remember that a quadratic is a problem that has x squared in it. Okay, so let's take a look at some problems here. So what if I said x squared equals 9? Well, if I were to, and you might already know, right? You might already know that this is x equals 3 and x equals negative 3. But let's just pretend we didn't know exactly what the answer was. Well, I could do the opposite of squaring something. Okay, the opposite of squaring something is square rooting. And so I could square root both sides. And because I did the opposite of squaring something, these two things are going to cancel each other out. So that square root right there and that squared are going to be gone now. You know, it's kind of like when we have x plus 3 and then we subtract 3 on both sides, and it makes this 0. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're kind of just making that portion of the equation go away. And then one thing, you just, in order to get both of those answers right there, you just have to get into the habit of putting a plus or minus in place of that, in front of that square root. And if I do that, I'll get plus or minus 3. Now, on the con practices, they have two different boxes to put your x values in. And they talk about like the smaller value and the larger value or something like that. So if I had answers of x equals 3 and x equals negative 3, well, it was just Khan Academy wants you to put the smaller answer right here, which would be negative 3, and the larger answer needs to be put right here, which is positive 3. So in all of the problems we do during this week, they ask for those two different things. They ask for the smaller value to be put first and the larger value to be put second. Okay? It might actually even be smaller x is what they might put in larger x. Okay? So let's talk about a few more examples here. Let's go with something like 3x squared equals 48. There are some problems like this on your con practices. Let's kind of talk about what we would do here. Well, I can't square root yet. Okay, first of all, I can't square root because I have that 3 there, and that 48, if you square root of 48, it's going to kind of give you a decimal that goes on and on forever and ever without repeating. So what we could do is, instead of square rooting first, we could, since this is 3 times x squared, I can just divide that out. And I would get x squared equals 16. Well, now I'm at this point where I started right here. I have x squared equals a number. And so either I could square root both sides. I'm going to do that. Square root both sides. And I would get plus or minus And don't forget your plus or minus 4. So my two answers would be x equals 4 or x can equal negative 4. And again, inside Khan Academy, they want the smaller x to be put first inside that box, and they want the larger x to be put in this box. So if this were the case, then I'd put negative 4 here and positive 4 there. All right, I've got two more examples for you. Here's 3x squared minus 6 equals 237. So we're going to treat this as if it's just a regular equation. We're going to try and get rid of things that we can get rid of easily by either adding and subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. So on this problem, I would first start by adding 6 to both sides. And again, that would make 0. And then we would have 237 plus 6 is 243. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 3. And I'll get x squared equals 81. Now, once you have this x squared all by itself, that's a good time to square root both sides. So I'm going to square root x squared, and then I'm going to square root the 81. Now, keep in mind that you must put that plus or minus in front of the 9 so that we get both answers, x equals 9 and x equals negative 9. And again, in Khan Academy, they want you to put the smaller x here, which would be negative 9, and the larger x here, which is positive 9. Okay, and that would be your answer for that problem. Okay, last one. So same thing here, just going to try and add or subtract, multiply, divide, so that we can just start getting, we want this to be all by itself before I square root it, okay? And so we're going to add 10 here and add 10 here, and that would give us negative 2x squared, because that goes to 0, and then we have negative 242, all right? And then the next thing we do, this is negative 2 times x squared, so we're going to divide both sides by negative 2, and then we're going to have x squared equals 121. Now, if you don't know what the square root of 121 is, you can use a calculator. You should be able to find a button on the calculator that has this symbol. And sometimes if you look at the buttons, like you might have an x squared button here, and then right above that in a different color is that symbol right there. And usually on scientific calculators, there's a second button up at the top. Usually it's in the top left corner. You may have to hit this button first in order to get this option. But if you do that, you should get x equals 11. And then again, make sure we get that plus or minus, and then we do the smaller and larger x's that Khan Academy wants. All right, just a quick little video on that. Make sure we understand what Khan Academy is asking for with the smaller x, larger x thing. Anyway, if you have any questions, email me. Give me a shout out on one of the Google Meets. If you ever need help, jump on those. And see you later.